All right, what's up guys? Look, I know my voice is doing something weird. This is just typical allergies in East Tennessee. Crops up in the fall and the spring. If you ever decide, hey, I want continuous headaches in my life and I want to be able to not breathe as well, then come visit me in the fall and spring in East Tennessee and I guarantee you'll leave with a headache. But I'm going to fight through for you guys. Let's do a video today and we're going to talk about film and the types of film I use for landscape photography. Now, I shoot 2 black and white films and 2 color films. Right off the bat, I will say that if you're one of those, especially with black and white film, who likes to do film testing and find out where the flat part of the density curve is and where the shoulder is, this is not going to be the video for you. This is more subjective, what I like about these films, what I don't like, and just some of my experiences shooting them in the field. So with that being said, let's go over the black and white films that I shoot. And for black and white, I use all Ilford products. I like to support Ilford because they support film photographers, unlike some film companies out there staring straight at you, Fujifilm. Ilford likes us. They like film photographers. They will have limited runs of film whenever they make batches of ultra large format film. Not many people shoot that, but this company still supports them in that format. So I try to support them back by buying all Ilford films and Ilford developer, stop bath, fixer, all that. So that's my little commercial for Ilford. The first film I shoot for them is Fuji Delta 100. Really like this film. It's the first film I ever shot and developed on my own. As the name implies, it is a 100 speed film. So what you're going to get from that is really fine grain, and that grain is going to give you really sharp images as well. Captures a huge dynamic range. You're going to have details in your darkest shadows and your brightest highlights. That's kind of a theme for all black and white film, but especially so I've found for Delta 100. It says that it is shootable from ISO 50 up to 200. I've never pulled it back to 50, but I shoot mainly at 100, and there's been a handful of times when I've needed a little extra speed. I've bumped it up to 200. You get a really contrasty image with 200. You'll maybe lose some details in your shadows when you shoot it that fast, but still a pleasing result. I like extra contrast in my images, so I actually enjoy shooting it at 200. Now, there's a few downsides to this film. I don't really care for the reciprocity characteristics. That's going to be the case again for most black and white films. The one I've come across that doesn't really have poor reciprocity failure is Fuji Neopan Acros 100. But most of your films, most of your black and white films, when you get into the even 1 and 2 second exposure time, you're really going to have to tack on extra time because that film starts to become quickly less sensitive to light. This is an issue for me because I shoot in a lot of dark areas. You know, in the Smoky Mountains, you'll get a lot of overhanging trees that block out the light, and of course the Narrows in Zion. So reciprocity really comes into effect whenever I shoot it. The other thing I don't like about it is it's not a very, it's kind of a limited film. Like I said, you can only shoot it between ISO 50 and 200. It doesn't have a large shooting range as far as that goes. But as long as I come across a scene that will look good at ISO 100, maybe 200, this is my go-to black and white film. Really forgiving when you develop it. You'll read online some places where it says it's not a forgiving film. I've not found that to be the case at all. It's forgiving, captures tons of dynamic range, and super sharp images, which is important because that's one of the main reasons we shoot large format. So really highly recommend shooting that film and just Ilford overall as a company. Now, as I was saying earlier, a lot of the scenes I shoot are relatively dark, and you know, I'm going to be shooting most of the time at f/45. A lot of times I've got a polarizer on, so I'm really having to crank up the exposure times to get enough light in there. And I've found that these long exposure times, especially when shooting water, You know, they give that really silky look. I don't mind the silky look if I'm shooting color. I've found that it doesn't really detract from the image because you've got all the colors and details to draw your attention elsewhere. But when you're shooting black and white and you have a big patch of water that just has no detail in it, that big bright white spot is I found very distracting. And so about a year ago, I started looking for a film that I could get faster shutter speeds with and really capture that detail in the water so it's not just a glaring sore spot in the image. And like I said, I've tried the Acros 100 from Fuji, and even though its reciprocity characteristics are good, you don't have to add any time until I think up to 2 minutes of exposure with that film. I was finding that its ISO was still too slow. You know, I was getting like 8 seconds, which there's no detail in fast moving water at 8 seconds. So I knew I needed a faster film overall, which brings me to another Ilford product, Ilford HP V+. Now, straight out of the box, this is a 400 speed film. And the great thing about HP V+ is it is so flexible. You can shoot it at 400, and that's going to give you kind of a flat image. Of course, if you develop in the darkroom, or if you print in the darkroom, or you scan, you can add contrast back later on. But where this film really starts to shine is when you push it. You're going to get that extra contrast. I very frequently shoot this at ISO 800, 1600. I've never gone beyond that, but I've read some places people shooting at 3200 with good results. I don't know what it's made out of, silver halide crystals and Jedi mind tricks maybe, but it just works. I don't know how, but whenever you push it, you don't lose any detail in the shadows. I've very quickly fallen in love with this film, and it would be my go-to film for everything except for the trade-offs. And that is, obviously with a faster film, you're going to get a little bit more grain. Even shooting 4x5, the grain is visible. Now, it's not detracting from the image like digital noise does. I can't stand noise in an image. I found that grain to a certain degree is actually pleasing in a black and white image. So I don't mind it too bad, but just be aware if you shoot this film, especially if you start pushing it, 1 or 2 stops, that grain is going to become more pronounced. So really, that's the only downside of this film. It's so flexible. I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, 1600 or 3200 from an out-of-the-box 400 speed film, that is really going to open up a lot of options for you in your shooting, and that's why I chose it to have that flexibility. If it's a bright scene, I'll go with Delta 100, but anything with moving water in it, or if it's dark, I'll break out the HP V+ and I'll push it to really get whatever shutter speed I need. Alright, so that's it for black and white film, which brings us to color film. Now, the first color film that I shoot and I'll go over is Kodak Door 100. Now, I love this film. It's got a huge dynamic range, very saturated, especially for color negative film, and very fine grain as well, almost as fine grain as Velvia 50, which is really saying something. So I love this film, except for the times when I hate this film, and that is when I have to scan it. Look, maybe I'm just bad at scanning, I don't know, but this is, for me, the biggest headache in the world to scan this film. I have an image called Toward the Light that took me, no joke, 3 days to scan. I would scan it, adjust my colors, or adjust my levels and curves, could not get the color right. You know, I'd back away from my computer for a while, go scream into a pillow, throw things at a wall. It's so frustrating to scan. But only sometimes. I've had other images, like an image from the Smoky Mountains called Serenity. It took me 2 seconds to scan that film. So I don't know I don't know what the difference is. I don't know why some images are just brutally hard to scan and some are easy. But when you get everything right, this film is really beautiful and it can be easy to scan. Now, one thing I'll caution you with, if you use this film, do not let your shadows go below -2. Part of my difficulty scanning is, I think, because I have a lot of images with dark shadows in them. Now, even if I'm very careful about keeping that darkest spot at -2 or brighter, I think that's what's affecting the scanner. But this film handles overexposure very well. It also, and I can't emphasize this enough, like most color negative films, is going to capture a huge dynamic range. Personally, I've seen it capture detail over 10 stops. An image I shot at Double Arch Alcove, it's not a great image, but it does really give a good example of just how large dynamic range this film will capture. There is a dark recessed cave at the base of Double Arch Alcove, and it's really hard to shoot and get everything framed up nicely without also getting up in the upper right hand corner a little triangle sliver of sky. And so as I was metering it, there were 10 stops of difference between that cave and the sky, and I was fully ready to let that sky be blown out. It was such a minor part of the image, it wasn't going to bother me anyway. And then when I scanned it in, I was shocked to see that it's not blown out, it's not white, there's blue in it. There's no clouds, so there's no real detail in it, but it captured the color that was there. So the ability to capture over 10 stops, or right at 10 stops of dynamic range, is a big deal. That's why I shoot color negative film, particularly Ektar. And when it scans right, it's a beautiful film. But those times when it doesn't, I mean, just color cast that's almost not correctable with curves. So if you guys have any tips for scanning Ektar, comments below, please hit me up, because it's almost like I fear shooting this film because I know eventually I'm going to have to scan it. But when it works really well. And this brings me to Fuji Velvia 50. Now, if you read about this film online, you're going to find out that people think it's an absolute religious experience when you view it on a light table. The best way I can describe Velvia 50 is it's like when you're in a relationship and you're in a relationship with a person that you know is not good for you. Whenever you go out to eat, they're going to buy the most expensive stuff. They're going to be unavailable most of the time, and you know eventually they're going to leave you and break your heart. But you stay with that person because they're just so hot and so fun to look at. That's Velvia 50. They don't distribute Velvia 50 in the US anymore. It's only available in Japan. They've raised the price so much. Right now for 4x5 film, it's right at $6 a sheet. And I know they're going to raise that again soon. I also know that one day they're going to discontinue Velvia 50 altogether, because nobody hates film photographers more than Fujifilm. But you know what? I'm going to keep buying their film until they cancel it, because there is nothing in photography like shooting Velvia. So what's so good about this film? It just has a look to it. I wish I could describe it better than that, but it's just gorgeous when you finally get it right. It's a very tough film to get right, though. It's limited in its dynamic range. You've got about 5 stops. And whereas the shadows are important in Ektar, it's the highlights that you can't blow out in Velvia 50. Whenever I'm metering, it's off the brightest part. I never let that go above +2. And usually that's white water for the things that I'm shooting. Anything beyond that, maybe 2.5, but you're going to be pushing it. It's going to get really blown out and look pretty bad. So it's limited dynamic range. It is a slow film, 50 speed film, so you're going to have to use longer shutter speeds, which means it's not usable if there is any kind of wind. If you want details in the water and moving water, forget about it. So very slow film, pretty poor reciprocity characteristics. It's about like a black and white film. You're going to have to add time to it. Even when you're shooting something as short as 1 second, you're really going to have to add time to it. Despite all that, this is my favorite film. The look it captures, just, it really can't be described. Very, very highly saturated film. Most people knock it for that, but I haven't found it to be too unrealistic. Just gorgeous, gorgeous saturation, particularly what it does with the color red. Just kind of magical. When you look at it on a light table, it transports you into a scene. It's like you're looking at it and you're really there. It's something you really owe to yourself to do. If you're into landscape photography at all, find an old 35mm camera, put a roll of Velvia 50 through it, and then look at it on a light table. You're going to be blown away. You got to be very careful metering it, like I said, and prepare for long shutter speeds. But you get the right light, and that film is really going to do magical things for you. Really sharp as well. And that has to do with it being really fine grain at ISO 50. So really, I can't recommend shooting this film enough, even with all the bad things about it. I'm going to keep buying it no matter how much it costs. I probably shouldn't say that, but I'm going to keep stocking up on it, and I'll shoot it as long as they supply it and as long as people are still developing E6. All right, so that's it. That is the film that I carry with me into the field. I've got 10 film holders. Usually 3 of those contain Velvia 50, 2 contain Ektar, 3 contain Delta 100, and 2 contain HP 5 Plus. So when I start out the day, I've got a lot of film with me that I feel can cover just about any lighting scenario. For color film, if I can get an image into that 5-stop sweet spot that Velvia captures, I'll shoot that. If it's higher dynamic range, I go to Ektar. For black and white film, if it's a bright scene or I don't need to freeze any movement, I'll go with Delta 100. If I need to freeze moving water or it's really dark, I will shoot HP 5 Plus and have that flexibility of whatever ISO I want to choose. So that's it for me. That's what I shoot. What do you guys shoot? I know especially there's a big variety of black and white films out there. I've always wanted to shoot Tri-X. I've never shot that, but I've got a lot of friends that do. For color film, you're going to be a little bit more limited. The Ektar and Velvia typically are the most popular for landscape photography. If you want huge, huge dynamic range, you can shoot Portra. I've never shot that for landscapes. But that captures something like 14 stops. It's a really unbelievable film. On the slide film side of things, there's Velvia 100. That is actually still available, and it's a pretty good film. Not quite as saturated as Velvia 50, but in the right light, that's a good film too. There's that and Provia 100, and that's pretty much it for the big guys shooting slide film. There may be some more obscure, smaller film companies producing slide film out there, but it's tough to come by. So what do you guys shoot? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know some films I should try. If you like this video and this content, give me a subscribe and a thumbs up, and see you guys next time.